Well, as you can see, I've decided to wear a black Hawaiian shirt because I think this is only appropriate as this episode is going to be kind of about mourning. It's kind of about the end of the swinging 60s. Now, if you remember in the last few episodes, we've been talking about how in 1969 the Woodstock Festival was such an amazing event. 460,000 people, 3 days of peace, love, and music. Nobody got killed. Nobody got seriously wounded. It was an amazing event. Well, now here we are just 4 months later. And what's happened is the musicians on the West Coast have decided, let's do a Woodstock around San Francisco. And so they decide they'll do one. Unfortunately, it's called Altamont. And that ends the decade of the 60s on a very, very disturbing note. Are you ready to go back to that racetrack? Well then, let's drop the needle. In 1969, the Rolling Stones had a very successful tour of the U.S., and I got to see them at the Forum in Los Angeles, and it was an amazing show. But the critics and the press were ripping them apart for their high ticket prices. And so the Stones decided, okay, and they did an announcement that they were going to do a free concert in San Francisco. And I was working in LA at radio at that time, and it was sort of like me and my friends said, hey, if this is going to happen, we got to go. Now, as I said in the opening, the musicians in San Francisco were trying to figure out how they could do a Woodstock type of thing on the West Coast. And Spencer Dryden and Jorma Kaukonen of the Jefferson Airplane decided that would be a great idea to do this. And they were talking to the Grateful Dead about doing it too. But when the Rolling Stones made their announcement that they wanted to do a free concert in the San Francisco area, everything just came together. In thinking about putting this concert together, they reached out to Michael Lang, one of the original organizers of Woodstock, and even Bill Graham, of course, who also helped out with Woodstock. Now, you would think that these guys had learned something from mounting the very successful Woodstock Music Festival. Unfortunately, it seems like they forgot. But just like with Woodstock, they announced the festival, but they didn't really have a venue. Now, originally they had thought, well, we'll have it on the grounds of San Jose State University, where just recently 52 bands had played for 50,000 people. So it seemed like a natural. But San Jose decided, nope, we don't want to do another one. Next up, they thought, well, how about Golden Gate Park? Yeah, it's a great venue, and you can play out on the grass, and many music concerts had been there. The Dead and the Airplane had played there many times. So why don't we do the festival there? Well, there was a problem, because also right next to Golden Gate Park is Kezar Stadium, and the 49ers were having a football game the same date that the Stones wanted to have their festival. So no permit was given for the festival. Scrambling, the organizers then decide on another venue, the Sears Point Raceway. But here, the owners of the raceway demanded anywhere between $100,000 and $300,000 up front from the Rolling Stones to hold the site. And the Stones said, no thanks. The festival was announced on being December the 6th, a Saturday. But by December the 4th, they still had no venue. So with all this confusion, my friends and I down in LA decide, well, maybe we better not go to that concert. Probably a good decision on our part. On the night of December 4th, they finally decided they could hold the concert at a racetrack called the Altamont Raceway. But with all these change of venues, that meant a lot of logistical problems was happening. They hadn't arranged for enough portable toilets or even medical tents to deal with the throngs that were expected to come to Altamont. But the big problem was the stage design. They had built the stage for the Sears Point location. And at that location, the stage would have been on top of a hill, which meant the audience would be seated going down the slope of the hill, so the stage didn't have to be too high. But when they moved it to Altamont, the stage is now at the bottom of the slope, and the audience is sloping away uphill from the acts, which meant that a low stage meant that virtually anybody from the crowd could just kind of step up onto the stage. That proves to be a big problem. So the question is, how do you secure the stage from the audience? Once again, in the chaotic surroundings of what this festival was going to be, nobody has a clear memory how this happened, but somehow they decided that it'd be a good idea to have the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club sit on the edge of the stage and tell them they could not let any of the audience come onto the stage. Wonder what they were thinking. Now, as it turns out, both the Jefferson Airplane and the Grateful Dead had used the Hells Angels as quote-unquote security for some of their shows around San Francisco. So apparently, somehow, someone convinced the Rolling Stones this would be a good idea. Bad decision. Now, this is where it gets very murky, because the Hells Angels have said they were never hired to be security. They were told first to keep people away from the generators, and second to keep people off the stage. But whatever, they're there sitting on the stage. The Hells Angels were paid $500 in beer and told they could sit on the stage and drink beer all day long. And all they had to do is make sure that there were no murders or rapes. Now, that's a pretty different vibe than we had just 4 months ago in Woodstock. The first act to perform on stage at Altamont was Santana, and of course they had performed at Woodstock. And they did Evil Ways, among the songs, they did Evil Ways and Soul Sacrifice. The day was getting hot, and the Hells Angels were drinking a lot of beer. And the experience for the crowd was pretty miserable. You couldn't really see anything, you couldn't hear anything, so the crowd started to get a little unruly. So the Hells Angels decide that they're going to use sawed-off pool cues as weapons and motorcycle chains to keep the crowd under control. Well, then somebody in the crowd decides to push over one of the Hells Angels motorcycles. Now, this is treason, according to the Hells Angels, and all hell broke loose. Fights were breaking out, but the Jefferson Airplane took the stage. And then Marty Balin of the Airplane saw a fight happening right in front of the stage, so he jumps off the stage to try to intervene and stop it. And he is knocked unconscious. Yeah, things are getting very weird at Altamont. The Jefferson Airplane started with "We Can Be Together," but the crowd wasn't really into that message. So then they played "The Other Side of This Life," which is during this song that Balin gets knocked unconscious. They also played "Somebody to Love," "White Rabbit," and "Volunteers." But the atmosphere was quickly deteriorating. Next up was the Flying Burrito Brothers. And somehow, with their soft little sort of country rock vibe, they were able to tone down the crowd and the Angels while they played their set. They played 9 songs, including 6 Days on the Road and Close Up the Honky Tonks. But after them, the next act up was Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, and once again, things got a little weird. They played 5 songs, including Long Time Gone, Down by the River, and Sea of Madness. But it was during their set that Stephen Stills was stabbed in the leg by a member of Hells Angels. Yeah, this is getting way out of control. The next act up was one of the organizers of the event, the Grateful Dead. But when they heard that Marty Balin of the Airplane had gotten knocked unconscious, the Grateful Dead decide that Altamont is getting too dangerous for them. And so they decide they're not going to play the event. That tells you how bad it's really gotten. Finally, around sundown, the Rolling Stones decide to make their appearance at Altamont. But this tells you how bad it's getting. As they are walking towards the backstage area, Mick Jagger gets punched in the face by a concert goer. The mood in the crowd had taken a really bad turn about this point, and fights were breaking out between crowd members and the Hells Angels right in front of the stage where the Stones were standing. And I mean, literally, as I've said before, anybody could have just stepped up onto the stage. It became a very frightening scenario. Now, when I watched the film that came out after the event called Give Me Shelter, and you can watch what's really happening on the stage when those fights break out between the crowd and the Hells Angels, and Jagger is standing right there trying to perform. It's an amazing thing to watch. Mick Jagger has always been the ultimate showman. He can control a crowd from the palm of his hand. But when you watch this footage, he has totally lost control of this crowd. And when you look at him, he's scared. As the fights continue near the stage, he pleads with the crowd to cool down. The Stones play 15 songs, starting with Jumping Jack Flash. But when they started the song Sympathy for the Devil, partway through the band stops playing because the fights in front of the stage are getting too violent. And again, Jagger says, "Hey, everybody, just cool down." And then the band starts the song up again. They played Love in Vain, and then they played Under My Thumb. And then this is when death comes to the Rolling Stones concert at Altamont. Near the front of the crowd is a young man named Meredith Hunter, who has attempted to climb on the stage. A member of the Hells Angels punched him, but a minute later he returned. His girlfriend says he was crazy at this point and probably high on drugs. But he comes back towards the stage and pulls out a .22 caliber pistol. Hell's Angel Alan Parso sees that revolver, draws his knife, and stabs Hunter twice, killing him. The Stones claim they couldn't really see what was going on, but they knew something was happening. The band stops the song midway through, and Jagger says, "Someone is really hurt. Is there a doctor?" And then after a little bit, they restart the song. Apparently, the Stones had a brief discussion at this point whether to abort their whole set and just leave. But they figured that if they did that, it would be a full-scale riot. So they played on. The Hells Angel member, Pissarro, was arrested and charged with murder. But when the jury watched the film from the movie Give Me Shelter, he was acquitted on self-defense. The film came about because the Melees brothers had shot the Stones concert at Madison Square Gardens, and the Stones thought that was very cool. So then the Melees brothers asked the Stones, "Hey, can we go on tour with you and shoot footage on tour?" And the Stones went, "Yeah, sure." So they were at Altamont, and they documented one of the darkest days in rock and roll's history. In the film, you get to see Mick Jagger sitting in the editing room and watching on a moviola as they run the footage as Meredith Hunter gets killed just feet away from where Jagger is standing. It's chilling. Now, an interesting side note, one of the cameramen who shot footage at Altamont was a very young George Lucas. But unfortunately, his film camera jammed very quickly into the concert, and none of his footage is used in the resulting film. So in 1969, within just 4 months of each other, we had 2 very large outdoor music festivals, which couldn't have been more different. In upstate New York, you had Woodstock, 3 days of peace, love, music, and mud. And then in December, in San Francisco, a city that prided itself on being hip, cool vibes, all of that, you had the disaster that was Altamont. Now, Woodstock had 460,000 people. And as far as I can figure out, no one died. Altamont, on the other hand, had about 300,000 people, which is a lot. But it was such an unruly crowd that it looks like, the reports say, that possibly 4 people died. So that's why I say Woodstock was such a great event. 4 months later, Altamont pretty much brings the curtain down on the swinging 60s. Now, unlike the Woodstock Music Festival, there was no album recorded or released for the Altamont Festival. As a result, the songs on the Spotify playlist for this episode are the songs that were mentioned, but they were not the recordings from Altamont, because as I said, those don't appear to exist. Thanks for watching. Hope you've enjoyed this little mini-series. Glad to say that it seems like the big outdoor music festivals today are 1, a lot more organized, 2, you can see and hear the bands, and 3, a lot safer. So I hope if you go, I hope you enjoy them. Hope you've enjoyed watching this, and until next time, keep it rocking. If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.